They said he felt nothing. 7 years on the throne. Not one moment of weakness. Not one crack in the stone. He buried his queen in a highland storm and came back the next morning, ruling like nothing had touched him, like nothing ever could. The entire continent believed it. His council believed it. His enemies believed it. Even his wolf had gone silent. Until the night she did not come back. Until the night he searched every passage, every corridor, every shadow in Blackmoon Castle, and could not find her. And for the first time in 7 years, King Ozrath was afraid, not of an enemy, not of a war, not of a throne being taken, afraid of silence, where her footsteps should have been. They said he felt nothing. They were wrong. He felt everything. He just needed her to show him where it was. And on the night she almost did not come back, the most feared alpha alive went to his knees on cold highland stone and did not care who saw it. This is not the story of a monster. This was never the story of a monster. This is the story of a king who forgot what it felt like to have something to lose until he almost lost it. Welcome to Crown of the Alpha, where every throne is taken by force and every crown comes with a curse. If you're new here, subscribe now and turn on notifications so you never miss a King Ozrath story. Drop a comment below and let me know what you think. Now let us begin. The Highland cold comes through the postern gate in the specific way it comes through every opening in Blackmoon Castle's outer wall at this hour. Not gradually, not as a shift in temperature, but as a complete replacement of the air inside with the air outside, sudden and total, carrying the specific combination of stone and highland grass and the particular darkness that exists only in the hour before the moon sets and the hour after it rises again. Ozrath does not notice the cold. He notices her. She is sitting against the outer wall on the cold highland stone with her right hand pressed against her left side, and her dark hair loose around her face, and the expression of someone who has completed something and is now, for the first time, allowing themselves to register what it cost. Her gray dress is torn at the left shoulder. There is stone dust on both her hands and a scrape across the back of her right forearm that she has not addressed because addressing it required attention she did not have available. She looks up when a torchlight reaches her. She does not look surprised to see him. She looks, and this is the word Ozrath will return to in the private architecture of his own mind later when the night has settled and the castle is quiet, relieved. Not the relief of rescue, the relief of someone who completed a task alone and is now allowing themselves to stop being alone in it. He crosses to her. He does not give instructions to Jackson. He does not address the four guards. He does not assess the tactical situation or calculate the next procedural step. He crosses to her the way a man crosses to the one fixed point in a space that has been moving around underneath the cold highland stone, and his large scarred hand goes to the place where her right hand is pressing against her left side, not moving her hand, covering it, adding the specific additional pressure of someone who understands wound management and is applying it before he asks a single question. His other hand goes to her face. The gentleness of it is not something he decides. It is not managed or considered or chosen from among available responses. It simply arrives, the way things arrive that have been present for some time and have finally found the moment that requires them. Her pale hand finds his wrist. She does not push him away. She holds on. The four guards have continued past them. Jackson has continued past them. The postern gate is open behind him, and the torch light from the castle interior falls across the highland ground and catches the specific quality of the moment. A king on one knee on cold stone in the dark, a woman holding his wrist, neither of them performing anything for anyone. He does not speak for a long moment. The wind moves across the highland ground and shifts her dark hair, and she does not move to address it, and he does not move to address it, and the moment has the specific texture of something that has been building for longer than either of them has been willing to measure. When he speaks, his voice carries something that has never been in it before. Not the command register, not the processing register, the register underneath both of those, the one that exists when the function is entirely set aside, and what remains is simply a man saying words to a person he has spent 40 minutes unable to find in the dark. He says, "You were supposed to tell me where you were going." She says, "I know." He says, "You did not tell me where you were going." She says, "I know." A moment. Then he says, "I cannot find you." 4 words. Carrying 40 minutes of a wolf that has not been wronged, yet moving forever in the left branch and the outer wall shaft in the highland perimeter. Moving with the specific urgency of something that has found what matters and cannot locate it, and is experiencing, for the first time in 7 years, the specific geography of fear. She looks at him in the torchlight. He looks at her, and something that has been building since a servant girl placed a document on a silver tray in the great hall of Blackmoon Castle, accumulating through suspended exile declarations, and hidden chambers, and forged seals, and founding charters, and a wolf that has not stopped moving, arrives at the surface of his face in the torchlight against the highland stone wall, and stays there long enough for her to see it completely. He picks her up. She does not argue. He carries her back through the postern gate into the castle, and Jackson falls into formation, and the guards fall into formation, and nobody says anything because nobody needs to. The torchlight of the castle interior replaces the highland dark, and the postern gate closes behind them, and as they move through the inner corridor toward the medical wing, Kira, being carried by the most feared alpha on the continent in a way that contains no performance and no calculation and no management repression, looks at his face in the torchlight. The expression is still there, not hidden, not recovered, still there. The look of a man who has just remembered what it feels like to be afraid of losing something. She stores it in the part of her mind that catalogs things that do not match their context. This time she does not hold it there waiting for the context to reveal itself. This time she already knows what it means. Sable Marin is found in the recess exactly where Kira left her. Jackson retrieves her personally, which is not standard beta protocol, but which Ozrath indicated with a single look when the report came in, and which Jackson executed without operating below the level of explicit instruction. He finds her sitting against the recess wall in the complete dark with her knees drawn up and her hands flat on the stone floor, and her gray eyes open and oriented correctly toward the passage entrance. Not disoriented, not panicked, simply waiting with the specific patience of someone for whom waiting in dark and closed spaces has become a practice skill over 4 years. She says when Jackson reaches her, "Which one are you?" He says, "Jackson, Beta, to the Alpha King." She says, "She said you would come." He says, "Can you walk?" She says, "I have been walking in this passage for 4 years. I can walk." She walks. Albert Voss and his 2 men are found in the outer wall shaft at the 7th floor, attempting to climb toward the grate, finding it closed and latching the outside by a mechanism Kira engaged on her way out. Unable to descend because Jackson's guards entered the shaft base from the passage below simultaneously. The arrest is procedurally clean and physically uncontested. Voss does not fight. He has the specific composure of a man who anticipated this outcome and prepared himself for it, and is now executing the behavior appropriate to it, which is surrender executed with enough dignity to imply that the game is not over, only this particular move. Ozrath is informed of both recoveries in the medical wing doorway by a guard who stops at the threshold because the Alpha King is standing at the window with his back to the room, and the specific quality of his stillness communicates that the threshold is the correct place to deliver reports. He receives both reports without turning from the window. He says the document stacks in the chamber. The guard says Jackson is having them carried out personally under royal seal. Ozrath says Voss. The guard says, holding cells. East wing. Ozrath says, the physician. The guard says, with an owl. Ozrath says, and remains at the window. In the medical wing, behind him, the pack physician completes his assessment of Kira's ribs. 2 cracked, none broken, 3 weeks of discomfort, 6 weeks to full recovery, and wraps them with the practiced efficiency of someone who has been the Blackmoon pack physician for 18 years and has wrapped a significant percentage of the pack's ribs at one point or another. Kira receives the assessment and the wrapping with the specific economy she brings to everything. No excessive response, no performance of stoicism, simply the acknowledgement of information and the acceptance of necessary procedure. Sable Marin sits in the chair beside the bed and drinks the warm broth that a kitchen servant brings without being asked. Someone in the castle understood what 4 years of ration passage living required as a first meal and acted on it. and watches Ozrath at the window with the gray eyes that have spent 4 years in the dark and are now in the warm torch light of the medical wing, recalibrating to a world that still exists and contains people in it. She says to Kira in the old Greymoor dialect that only the two of them in the room understand, "Your mother would have liked it." Kira looks at the back of Ozrath's crown. She says nothing, but her hands on the blanket are still. Jackson enters with a sealed report on the document stacks. He hands it to Ozrath at the window. Ozrath reads the first page. His expression moves through something that Jackson, who has witnessed this man receive assassination attempts, territorial wars, and the death of his queen without visible alteration, does not have a prior reference for. He hands the report back. He says, "Bring Sable Marin to the reading room when she is ready." Then he looks at Kira on the bed. He says, "Rest." Then he looks back out the window at the highland dark. He does not leave. He does not explain why he does not. Jackson exits with the report. The kitchen servant removes the empty broth bowl. The torch on the wall burns steadily. 3 people remain in the medical wing. One at the window, one in the bed, one in the chair, watching both of them with the gray eyes of someone who spent 4 years alone with documents and is now, for the first time in a very long time, watching something happen between 2 people in real time. Sable Marin finishes her broth. She sets the bowl down. She says nothing, but the expression on her face in the old Greymoor dialect means, yes, this is right. Sable Marin takes 3 days before she is ready for the reading room. Not because she is unwell. Her body has maintained itself through 4 years of rationed living with the specific care of someone who treated survival as a long-term project requiring daily maintenance rather than crisis management. She is thin. She is tired in the specific way that accumulates over years rather than days and cannot be addressed by a single night of proper sleep. But she is not broken and she is not confused in her mind, which was always the most formidable thing about her. The quality that made her Kira Vashe's closest colleague for 15 years is completely intact. She takes 3 days because she needs to reorganize the document stacks. The transfer from the hidden chamber to the reading room involved handling by multiple people. Jackson's guards, however careful, are not archivists. And the specific cross-referencing system she developed over 4 years in the dark requires a precision of organization that does not survive casual transport. She spends 3 days in the reading room reordering, re-annotating, and re-cross-referencing everything before she will allow anyone to sit across the table from her and ask questions. Kira helps her. This is not a decision that requires discussion. Kira comes to the reading room on the first morning, governing the pace of everything she does, but not preventing anything, and sits down across from Sable and picks up the first stack and begins organizing it in the system she recognizes from her mother's training without being told what the system is. Sable watches her do it for approximately 30 seconds. Then she says yes like that. Then they work in silence for 3 days the way archivists work, with a specific companionable quiet of 2 people who understand that documents require attention, and attention requires the absence of unnecessary sound. On the evening of the 3rd day, Sable says, "I am ready." The reading room the following morning contains 4 people. Ozrath at the head of the table, Kira to his right, Jackson standing at the wall, and Sable Marin. Sitting across from Ozrath for the first time, the 3 document stacks organized before her with the precision of someone who has spent 4 years making sure this moment would be worth the time it took to arrive. Looking at the Alpha King of the Blackmoon territory with the direct assessment of a woman who has been waiting 23 years to sit in this room. She begins with what she calls the surface layer. Crow's 11-year operational history inside Blackmoon Castle. The forged seals, the planted council motions, the external communications, the financial diversions, laid out in sequential order with documentary evidence for each action. It takes 40 minutes. Ozrath listens without interrupting. Jackson takes notes. Kira already knows most of it from the documents she read in the hidden chamber, but hears it organized into a complete chronological picture for the first time and understands that the chronology is more damning than any individual piece. Then Sable says, that is the 11-year layer. She opens the second stack. The 30-year layer is different in quality from the 11-year layer. Less operational, more architectural. Not what Crow did, but what he was building toward. The structure of an influence operation that predates his appointment to the Blackmoon Castle by 19 years. External correspondence conducted through 3 intermediary channels. Financial arrangements that used the Blackmoon treasury as a conduit for transfers that originated outside the territory and were destined for accounts that have no official pack affiliation. A pattern of territory management that treats Blackmoon not as a sovereign pack with its own interests, but as a managed asset with a designated function. Jackson stops writing. Ozrath's hands go flat on the table. Sable says there's a 3rd layer. She opens the 3rd stack. She places the top document on the table. It does not bear any seal Ozrath recognizes. It does not bear any seal that appears in any of the documents in the 1st or 2nd stack. It is old, older than anything else on the table. The specific age quality of something that has been carefully preserved across multiple decades and multiple custodians. The seal is elaborate, formal, the kind of seal that belongs to a body with the institutional authority to create its own visual language and the longevity to have that language recognized across generations. Sable says, this is who placed Crow here 30 years ago. She says, this is who has been watching Blackmoon territory since before you were born. Ozrath looks at the seal. His jaw goes tight with the specific tension of a man who is processing something that is simultaneously larger than he expected and somehow exactly the shape of something he has always known was there without being able to name it. He says one word, who? The seal sits on the reading room table, and Ozrath looks at it the way he looked at the dissolution order in the hidden chamber, with the complete attention of someone whose mind is running 2 processes simultaneously, one in the present and one somewhere else entirely. And the somewhere
Jackson
else
says,
do you recognize it? Ozrath does not answer immediately. This is unusual. In 9 years of service, Jackson has observed that Ozrath's response time to direct questions is among the fastest of any alpha he has served. Not because he answers without thinking, but because his thinking operates at a pace that makes the gap between question and response functionally invisible. The pause that follows Jackson's question is therefore not the pause of consideration. It is the pause of retrieval, of a mind going somewhere specific and taking longer to return than expected. Kira watches his hands. She has learned that his hands tell her things his face has been trained to conceal. His hands are flat on the table. Both of them, perfectly still. The specific stillness that is not composure, but the physical response of a body that has received information that requires everything else to stop. Sable watches his face. She has the patience of 4 years in the dark and the specific quality of attention that comes from spending those 4 years with nothing but documents and memory for company. She does not rush. She does not prompt. She simply holds the space that the moment requires. The torch on the wall burns. The highland morning comes through the reading room window and catches the dust motes above the document stacks and makes them visible, small, suspended, moving in the specific random patterns of things that exist in air currents too subtle to be felt. Ozrath says, I have seen this seal before. Not in the documents. Not in any record he has accessed since the summit or the hidden chamber or the 30-year audit that has been running since Crow's arrest. Not in any official context. Not in any administrative function of the Blackmoon Castle going back to the beginning of his reign. Before the reign, before the crown, before the night that created the necessity of both. He was 16 years old, and the storm had been in the war room because the physician had not yet arrived, and he had been standing outside the war room door. Not inside, not yet, not able to go inside yet. And he'd seen the light under the door. Not the torch that was always burning in the war room. A different light, moving. A handheld lamp or a small torch carried by someone who was in his father's war room before the guards found the body, and who should not have been there, and who left before the guard arrived, and whose 16-year-old Ozrath, standing in the storm corridor outside the door, with the specific paralysis of someone who has just been told that the person they relied on most is gone, watched leave through the servants' passage at the far end of the corridor and did not follow because following required movement, and movement required the kind of decision-making capacity that had temporarily stopped being available. He went into the war room after. He found his father. He found everything that the history records say he found on that night, the specifics of which have never been discussed publicly and never will be. And he found one more thing, on the war room floor beside the table. A document, dropped. He always assumed accidentally, by whoever had been in the room before him. He picked it up without reading it. He put in the personal archive case that he carried with him from that night forward, because the personal archive case was the only thing of his father's he took with him when they moved him to the Alpha King's chambers 3 days later, and he was not going to leave anything behind that had been in his father's possession. He read it later. He could not identify the seal. He filed it under materials from the night of his father's death and did not return to it, because returning to it required returning to the night, and returning to the night was not something he was doing. He has not opened that archive case, the personal archive. Royal Chambers. Third shelf. Black case. Bring it. Jackson leaves. Kira is looking at him, not at the document on the table. At him, with the specific focused attention she brings to things that matter and the specific quality of stillness that means she is not going to ask the question she is holding because she has understood that the answer is coming and questions in this moment would be obstacles rather than shortcuts. He looks at her. He says, "The night my father died, someone was in his war room before the guards found the body. I was 16. I saw a light under the door." He pauses. It was not the physician that he has never told anyone this. Not Jackson, not the council, not the pack historians who documented the official account of the assassination and whose version, approved, sealed, filed in the Royal Archive, contains the facts that can be publicly held and none of the ones that cannot. Not Marin, his queen, in 14 months of marriage that contained more genuine conversation than the preceding 16 years of his life combined. Because even with Marin there were rooms he did not open, and this was one of them. He tells Kira, in the reading room with Sable Marin on his left and Jackson, not yet returned, and the Highland morning coming through the window and the seal on the table between them. He tells her the complete version of the night his father died for the first time in 20 years of carrying it. His father's name was King Ozrath the Elder, the same first name as the council elder currently in the holding cells, which is a coincidence of naming convention common enough in the territory to be unremarkable and which Ozrath has spent 20 years treating as exactly that. His father was Alpha King for 19 years before the assassination. He was not, by the account of those who serve him, a gentleman. He was an effective one, which in the governance of the Blackmoon territory a quality of decisiveness that does not leave much room for gentleness. He was, however, by the same accounts, a man who understood the difference between power applied for its own sake and power applied for a purpose. He had a purpose. He spent 19 years pursuing it. The purpose was the Unification Accord, the same accord whose failed treaty now sits suspended in the Blackmoon archive with 14 pages of legitimate text and 1 page of hidden servitude clause. His father spent 19 years building the diplomatic architecture for a genuine territorial unification. Not the managed asset version that Crow's external faction has been engineering, but an actual sovereign agreement between pack territories that would give smaller packs genuine protection and genuine representation without subordinating them to the larger ones. He was close. In the final year of his reign, he was closer than anyone had been in the history of the continent's pack governance. He was assassinated 14 days before the signing ceremony. Ozrath was 16. He became Alpha King in a storm. He spent the following 7 years building the kind of authority that would prevent anyone from ever making the calculation that removing the Blackmoon Alpha was a viable strategic move. He built it effectively. He built it so effectively that the method became the identity and the purpose, his father's purpose, got filed under the archive case he did not open. He opens it now. Jackson returns with it during the telling, sets it on the table silently, and takes his position at the wall, and Ozrath reaches for it without interrupting himself, and opens it while he speaks, and removes the document that has been inside it for 20 years, and places it on the reading room table beside Sable's document. He finishes telling Kira the night. The silence that follows has the specific quality of silence that follows when someone has said something for the first time. Not empty silence, not uncomfortable silence, but the silence of something that has been in a closed room finally having air. Kira looks at the 20-year-old document, then at Sable's document, then at the two seals. She does not need to say what she sees. It is visible to everyone in the room. The seals match. The elaborate formal seal of a body with the institutional authority to create its own visual language and the longevity to have that language recognized across generations. Pressed into the wax of a document dropped on the war room floor of a murdered Alpha King 20 years ago, and pressed into the wax of a document recovered from a hidden chamber 4 years into the reign of his son. The same hand, 20 years apart. Sable looks at the 20-year-old document for a long time. She picks it up. She reads it. She sets it down. She says this document was not meant to survive that night. The person who left it behind left it deliberately, as a message to whoever was going to sit on the Blackmoon throne next. She turns it over. On the reverse side, in 20-year-old ink, faded but legible, written in a hand that is not his father's and not Crow's, and not anyone whose handwriting Ozrath has ever been asked to identify. The reading room 3 words. Holds the 3 words. When she is ready. Written 20 years ago on the reverse of a document dropped on a dead king's war room floor by a figure who was gone before the guard arrived. Written for a reader who would not exist for another 20 years, in a territory that was not yet his, in a moment that had not yet been built by the specific chain of events that started with a servant girl placing a document on a silver tray in a great hall. Jackson says, "Who wrote it?" Nobody answers. Not because the answer is unknown, but because the answer requires a moment to be received in its full implication before it can be spoken. The answer is not a name. The answer is a framework. The answer is the specific understanding that changes every prior assumption about the sequence of events that brought all of them to this reading room at this moment. Ozrath says, the document was left for me specifically. Sable says, yes. He says, 20 years ago, before I was Alpha King, before my father was assassinated. Sable says, yes. He says, which means whoever left it knew my father was going to die. The room does not respond to this immediately. It is the kind of statement that requires the space around it to settle before the weight of it can be properly assessed. Sable says, or insured it. 3 more words. Different weight. The reading room receives them. Ozrath's hands are flat on the table. Kira is looking at the 3 words on the reverse of the document. When she is ready, with the expression of someone who is running a calculation that has multiple simultaneous variables and is tracking each one without losing the others. She has been doing this since the document was turned over. She has not spoken since. Sable opens the 3rd document stack fully now. The documents she has not yet shown them, the ones that go beneath the surface and 30-year layers into what she calls the architectural layer. The layer that shows not what was done, but why. Not the operations, but the intention behind them. The external faction, the body whose seal appears on both documents, does not want Blackmoon territory destroyed. This is the first and most important thing the architectural layer establishes. 3 decades of operational presence inside the most powerful packed territory on the continent does not serve a destruction agenda. Destruction is simple. Destruction does not require 30 years of careful placement and patient management. Control requires 30 years. Specifically, control of the Blackmoon throne's decision-making capacity at the moment of genuine continental unification. The moment Ozrath's father was 14 days from achieving. The moment that the suspended Blood Moon Treaty is the latest version of. The moment that, if it arrives under the current treaty's hidden servitude clause, delivers 3 smaller packs into managed subordination under a faction that has been building toward exactly this outcome for 3 decades. The faction does not want to destroy the unification. They want to own it. They want the unification to happen, with them holding the mechanism of it. And the mechanism requires one specific thing. Kira says, the archive. Everyone looks at her. She says, the Greymoor archive. The original, not the reconstruction. The specific knowledge that my mother held about the original pact territorial agreements. The genuine historical record of how pact territories were established and what the founding agreements actually said before 3 decades of administrative revision changed the record. The knowledge that proves the servitude clause has no legitimate historical precedent because the original founding agreements explicitly prohibited exactly this kind of subordination. She looks at Sable. She says, "That is what the reconstruction contains. That is what my mother gave you in 48 hours of dictation. Not just records. The legal argument. The complete evidentiary on historical grounds in front of the High Council." Sable says, "Yes." Kira says, "And the faction knows the reconstruction exists." Sable says, "They have known since the night your mother dictated the first word." Crow informed them. They allowed it to continue because a reconstruction held by a 71-year-old woman in a hidden chamber is not a threat. A reconstruction in the hands of someone with the standing to present it formally. That is a different calculation. Ozrath stands. He walks to the window. He stands there for a long time with his back to the room. Then he says, "Who sent Crow?" Sable says the document does not name them directly, but the seal is identifiable to anyone with access to the pre-council territorial records. Records that predate the current High Council's administrative revision of the historical archive. Ozrath says, "I have access to the pre-council territorial records." Sable says, "I know. That is why the message was left for you." Ozrath turns from the window. He looks at Kira. He says, "How are your ribs?" The pre-council territorial records are kept in a vault beneath the royal archive that requires 3 keys. The Alpha King's personal key, the head archivist's key, and a rotating council key that changes hands every 5 years and is currently held by a council position that Ozrath has suspended pending investigation. He has 2 of the 3 keys. Jackson has the suspended council member's key confiscated during the arrest procedure 3 days ago. They have all 3. The vault opens at the 2nd hour past midnight. Ozrath choosing the hour deliberately, the specific hour when the castle's rhythms are at their lowest, and the record of access will be witnessed by the minimum number of people. He goes in alone. Jackson stands at the vault entrance. Kira is in the reading room with Sable, working through the reconstruction documents because the ribs govern the pace of past midnight is not what the physician recommended for the first week of recovery, and Ozrath did not offer the option, and Kira did not ask for it. She noted his expression when he left. She did not say anything. He is in the vault for 2 hours. When he comes out, his face is in the configuration that she has learned means the processing layer has completed and the decision layer has taken over. The shift from receiving information to acting on it, which in Ozrath's internal architecture appears to happen as a clean transition rather than a gradual one. He comes to the reading room. He sits down. He places the pre-council record on the table, the specific document that identifies the seal that connects the elaborate formal mark to the body that created it, that names the institutional origin of 30 years of operational presence in the Blackmoon territory. He says it is a faction within the High Council itself. The reading room receives this. He says, not the full council, a subbody, operating outside the council's official mandate, using the council's institutional authority as cover for an independent agenda that the official council either does not know about or has chosen not to examine. Sable says, "How long?" He says, "The pre-council records go back 60 years. The earliest operational signature I can identify is 42 years ago. The faction predates Crow's placement by 12 years. My father's assassination by 22. Kira says, they've been doing this for 42 years. He says, at minimum, the silence that follows is the specific silence of a number that is too large to be received quickly. Jackson says, Blackmoon is not the only territory. Ozrath says, no. Jackson says, how many? Ozrath says, based on the pre-council records, at least 6. Possibly more. The records only document what was formally registered. An operation this size would not formally register. 42 years. One faction operating within the governing body of the entire Continental Pact system. Using it as cover, using it as authority, using it as the institutional weight that makes a seal on a document means something that cannot be easily challenged. Jackson stops writing again. He has stopped writing twice in this investigation at moments when the scope expanded beyond what writing can adequately capture, and this is the second time. Kira is looking at the pre-council record document. She is reading it with the same attention she gave to page 14 of the Bloodmoon Treaty, completely, precisely, moving through the legal language with the specific literacy of her mother's daughter. And her expression is carrying the specific quality of someone who is not surprised by what they are reading, but is encountering the full documented confirmation of something they have understood and outlined for some time. She says, the oversight delegation. Everyone looks at her. She says, the High Council oversight delegation that was sent in response to the suspended treaty. The one arriving in 7 days. Ozrath says, yes. She says, it was not sent by the official council. It was sent by the faction, using the official council seal. The same way Crow used your seal. The same mechanism. Different scale. Ozrath says, yes. She says, they're coming here because they know the reconstruction exists. They know Sable is free. They know the seal has been identified. The delegation is not oversight. It is containment. The reading room is very quiet. Jackson looks at Ozrath. Ozrath looks at the document, then at Kira, then at the pre-council record. 7 days. A delegation that is not what it claims to be arriving with the institutional authority of the High Council and the specific agenda of ensuring that the reconstruction, the identified seal, and the people who hold both of them do not reach the official council before the options available in 7 days are limited. One of them is waiting. Ozrath does not consider it for long. He tells her the following morning. Not in the reading room. Not in the war room. In the small courtyard adjacent to the east wing. The one with the stone bench and the highland view and the specific quality of open air that the castle's interior does not provide. Because Kira has been in enclosed spaces for the better part of a week, and the physician said that the ribs benefit from breathing room, and Ozrath arrived at the medical wing at the 7th hour with a specific expression of someone who has made a decision and requires a different setting than a stone table to deliver it. She is sitting on the bench when he arrives. She has the founding charter in her hands, not reading it, simply holding it, the archivist's grip, looking at the highland territory in the early morning light, the Greymoor land visible in the distance, the specific piece of highland ground that is legally Greymoor again, formally and permanently, under the reinstatement document in the reading room. He sits beside her, not across from her, beside her, which is different, and they both know it is different, and neither of them addresses the difference because some things are more clearly understood when they are not named. He says, I'm going to High Council. She says when. He says 3 days before the delegation arrives. If we wait for them to come here, the terms are theirs. If we go there first, the terms are ours. She says we. He says, I am taking Sable's reconstruction. Jackson and 12 guards. The pre-council records. And the 20-year-old document from my father's war room. He pauses. He says, and you. She looks at the highland. He says, not as a witness. Not as evidence. As the person who holds the knowledge that the reconstruction points to. The person that 30 years of this operation was ultimately designed to either control or eliminate. He pauses again. He says, when she is ready. I need to know if you are. The courtyard is very quiet. The highland wind moves across the open ground beyond the castle walls and comes through the courtyard entrance and shifts her dark hair, and she does not address it. She is thinking about 11 survivors walking in 11 directions. She is thinking about 4 years of invisibility maintained with the specific precision of someone who understood that being seen was the most dangerous thing available. She is thinking about a silver tray in a great hall and a folded document, and the moment she decided that the law was the smaller cost. She is thinking about the founding charter in her hands and the reinstatement document in the reading room and the 3 words on the reverse of a 20-year-old message. When she is ready, she says, what happens if I go and I'm not enough? He says, what happened when you placed a document on a silver tray and were not supposed to speak? She says, everything changed. He says, yes. She looks at the highland, the Greymoor land in the morning light, the ground that has a name again. She says, 3 days. He says, 3 days. She nods once. He does not move immediately. He sits beside her on the stone bench in the small courtyard with the highland morning coming through the entrance and the founding charter in her hands between them and the specific quality of shared silence that exists between 2 people who have stopped needing to fill it. Then he stands. He says, "The physician said walking helps the ribs." She says, "The physician said rest helps the ribs." He says, "The physician is not going to the High Council in 3 days." She looks up at him. The expression on his face is not the command register, and not the processing register, and not the register that arrived in the torchlight against the Highland stone wall outside the postern gate. It is something not having a name in pack law, or in governance, or in the official record of anything King Ozrath of the Blackmoon territory has ever done. She stands up. She holds the founding charter in her right hand and walks beside him back into the castle. The 3 days have a quality unlike any 3 days that preceded them in Blackmoon Castle. Not frantic, not operational in the specific pressurized way that the days since the summit have been operational. Crisis moving into crisis, moving into revelation, moving into decision. These 3 days are something else. They are the days between decision and execution. The days when everything that needs to be done is being done by the people assigned to do it, and what remains for the people who made the decision is the specific experience of living inside the time between choosing and arriving. Jackson manages the operational preparation, the 12 guards selected and briefed, the document cases sealed under royal protocol, the horses prepared, the route mapped through 3 pack territories to the High Council seat. The formal notification sent to the official High Council through the correct channels announcing the Alpha King's intention to present evidence of a significant administrative irregularity requiring full council review. The formal notification is a deliberate move. It uses the correct language and the correct channels and creates an official record of the visit's purpose before the faction can receive private notification and prepare a counter-narrative. It also tells the faction that Ozrath is coming, which is the point. Coming with warning is different from arriving as a surprise. Coming with warning says, "I am not hiding. I have what I need. I am bringing it to the full council, because the full council is who it belongs to. Any attempt to intercept or manage this before it reaches the full council will itself become evidence." Crow and Vashe remain in the holding cells. Their formal charges are being prepared by the Pack Legal Council, a document that grows longer with each document stack. Sable cross-references and annotates. By the end of the 3 days, it is 47 pages. Sable spends the 3 days finishing the reconstruction organization and writing a formal archival summary. 40 years of Greymoor's documented history condensed into a legal presentation format that can be placed before the High Council alongside the pre-council territorial records and the 20-year-old message and the identified seal, and understood completely by anyone with the institutional literacy to read it. She works efficiently. She has been waiting for this. On the second night, Ozrath comes to the medical wing, not because Kira summoned him, not because there is a new development, not because any operational requirement directs him there. He comes because the second night of the 3 days is when the weight of what comes next is most present, and the reading room is empty, and the war room is too much itself, and the small courtyard is cold, and the medical wing, where someone he trusts is recovering in the specific way that people he trusts are not supposed to need to recover, is where he goes. He sits in the chair beside the bed. He does not explain. She does not ask. Sable Marin is in the corner, apparently sleeping, which may or may not be accurate, and does not say anything. The torch on the wall burns. The Highland night comes through the window. Ozrath sits in the chair and looks at the window, and Kira lies in the bed and looks at the ceiling, and the silence between them has the specific texture of something that has moved past the need for management. He says, "After the High Council." She says, "Yes." He says, "Greymoor." She says, "Yes." He says, "The other 10 survivors." She says, "I know where 6 of them are." The list Crow had. The locations were current as of the summit. 6 of the 10 locations I can verify independently. She says, he says, "I will find them." He says, "We will find them." She looks at the ceiling. The specific texture of those 2 words in that order. The same correction he made 3 days ago in the courtyard. The same quiet insistence on a pronoun that is different from the one she has used for 4 years. Sits in the medical wing with the torchlight and the Highland night and the apparently sleeping Sable Marin. She says, "Your wolf." He says, "Yes." She says, "It has not been wrong yet." He says, "No." She says, I'm going to hold you to that. He says, I know. Sable Maren in the corner does not move. But the expression on her face in the old Greymoor dialect, visible to no one, addressed to no one, simply present in the torchlight of the medical wing at the second hour of the second night, means, yes, your mother knew. She always knew that on the morning of the third day, Kira comes to the war room at dawn. She is wearing a different dress, not the gray servant dress, the dress of someone trying to be invisible, the dress that was the uniform of 4 years of survival discipline, the dress that she has worn every day since she arrived at Blackmoon Castle service entrance, with a different surname and a fabricated origin and the specific intention of becoming the most forgettable person in the building. That dress is in the medical wing. She will not be returning to it. This dress is darker, better fitted, no rank symbols. She has no rank and is not pretending to have one, but no longer the dress of someone whose primary design requirement is to not be seen. It is the dress of someone who has decided that being seen is no longer the most dangerous thing available. Ozrath is already in the war room. He is standing at the table with the sealed document case containing Sable's reconstruction and his father's 30-year-old message and the pre-council territorial records and the 47-page charge document for Crow and Voss. The case is sealed, correctly applied to a document case that will be presented to the full High Council in the territory's name. He looks up when she enters. He looks at her for a moment. He says nothing about the dress. He does not need to. He hands her the document case. She takes it. The archivist's grip, both hands flat, the specific way her mother held documents. The way she has held everything that mattered since she was 11 years old, sitting on the warm archive floor, being taught by a woman whose hand she has. They walk out of the war room together. The castle is already awake around them. The morning rhythms of Blackmoon's domestic and operational life proceeding with the specific continuity that castles maintain regardless of what their occupants are carrying. Kitchen, sound from the lower floors. Guards completing the night rotation. The head housekeeper, the successor to Mrs. Gable, who was removed from her position in the administrative review that followed Crow's arrest, directing the morning cleaning rotation in the East Wing corridor. The cleaning crew steps aside as they pass, not the specific stepping aside of people making way for the Alpha King, that has a particular quality, a practiced deference, a managed response. This is different. This is the stepping aside of people who recognize that something is happening that they do not yet have the full language for, and are giving it the space that recognition requires. Jackson is at the main gate with the 12 guards and the horses and the sealed cases and the specific operational readiness of a man who has prepared an exit he intends to make count. Sable Maren is beside Jackson. She is wearing a cloak that belongs to the Blackmoon guest provision. Dark, well-made, the first proper garment she has worn in 4 years that was not the ration clothing of the hidden chamber, and she is standing in the main courtyard in the highland morning with her face of someone who has been in the dark for a long time and is allowing the light to arrive without rushing it. She looks at Kira when they come through the main gate. She looks at the document case in Kira's hands. She looks at Ozrath beside her. She says nothing, but her eyes in the old Greymoor dialect say everything they need to say. They mount. The gate opens. The Highland Road begins. Blackmoon Castle recedes behind them in the morning light. The stone walls and the towers and the banners and the specific architectural weight of a place that has been the most powerful seat of pack governance on the continent for 7 generations. Ozrath does something he has not done since the night Maren died in a Highland storm. He looks back at it, not checking, not tactical, not the practiced assessment of a man confirming that his territory is as he left it, simply looking, the specific look of a man leaving something he intends to return to differently than he left it, understanding for the first time in 7 years that the place he is leaving is not just a seat of governance, but somewhere he lives. That there is a distinction between the two. That the distinction matters. Kira does not look back. She has been looking back at Blackmoon Castle for 4 years from the inside. She knows what it looks like from every angle and in every light and at every hour. She is looking forward for the first time. The Highland Road opens ahead, long, cold, bright in the morning light, running through the territory toward the horizon and beyond it toward the High Council seat and the 42-year-old faction and the official council that does not yet know they are coming, and the full accounting that 30 years of hidden architecture has been, by its own design, building toward. Saipleus beside Kira. She leans close. She says in the old Greymoor dialect, quiet, below the sound of the horses, below the wind on the highland road, your mother's last words in the